Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? Maybe they didn't mean to. Maybe it was just the way things were here. Rank and swagger got attention. Quiet presence did not. But still, Lieutenant Sarah Keating felt the weight of invisibility press on her shoulders as she stood among rows of younger Marines, their boots perfectly aligned, their eyes darting anywhere but toward her. She was used to it by now. In fact, she preferred it. Being unseen was safer. It was easier to disappear into the background, easier to pretend that she was just another logistics officer with nothing remarkable in her record. Because the truth, the part no one here could ever know, was that she was anything but ordinary. The morning sun baked the asphalt of the parade ground in Okinawa, turning every surface into a shimmering mirage. Orders barked, drill instructors shouted, and the metallic clatter of weapons echoed through the air. It was a day like any other, yet Sarah felt the slightest tremor in the stillness of her chest, a whisper of the past, clawing at the edges of her carefully built disguise. She shifted her weight slightly, hands clasped neatly behind her back. Around her, recruits adjusted their caps and straightened their spines whenever an officer passed. When she walked by, they didn't move not because of disrespect, but because they didn't feel the need to. She looked like no one worth noticing. That was the plan. Her assignment to the logistics unit had been deliberately mundane. Paperwork, supply routes, and convoy manifests, the kind of work that drew no questions. But behind the neatly printed name on the roster and the sterile personnel file that bore no commendations, no awards, no history beyond the ordinary, there was a ghost, a name whispered in the darker corners of military intelligence. And ghosts, by definition, were meant to be unseen. The morning inspection had gone smoothly, at least, until Colonel James Whitaker arrived. Even after 3 decades in uniform, Whitaker still moved with the kind of authority that made men straighten instinctively. Tall, broad-shouldered, his presence filled the space before his voice even did. The recruits snapped to attention, boots locking in unison, and the air shifted under the weight of his presence. He was not a man easily unsettled. He'd led men through firefights in Helmand, stood his ground under mortar fire in Kandahar, and stared down death more times than anyone could count. His calm was legendary. Which was why what happened next unsettled her. The colonel's eyes swept over the formation, his usual routine, names, ranks, quick questions, a few sharp corrections. But when his gaze fell on Sarah, it lingered. Too long. Long enough that she felt the hairs at the back of her neck rise. He frowned just slightly as he flipped through the tablet in his hand, the personnel roster. His brow furrowed deeper the more he read. Her file was perfect, too perfect. No blemishes, no reprimands, but also nothing extraordinary. For a Marine in her 30s, there should have been more deployments, commendations, performance evaluations. Instead, it read like someone had carefully edited out entire years of her life. He stopped in front of her. The crowd went silent. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, "what's your call sign?" The question hit the air like a live round. It was the kind of thing you'd hear in a special operations briefing, not a logistics inspection. Call signs belonged to pilots, recon units, covert teams, not to someone whose job involved fuel requests and transport schedules. A few of the younger Marines glanced sideways, confused. Sarah's pulse didn't change. She slowly lifted her chin until her eyes met the colonel's. For a moment, neither of them moved. "Phantom 7, she said quietly. The words were barely more than a breath, but they detonated like a grenade in the silence. Whitaker froze. It wasn't a pause or a moment of calculation. It was something deeper. His jaw tightened, and a flicker of something passed over his face that none of the recruits had ever seen before. Fear. The courtyard stayed silent, but the atmosphere shifted. The colonel swallowed, his throat dry. His hand twitched at his side, a small, involuntary motion that betrayed the iron-fisted control he was known for. Dismissed, he barked suddenly. The formation scattered, confusion spreading through the ranks. Only Sarah remained where she stood, her face neutral, her body still. "You," the colonel said quietly, pointing toward the barracks. "My office, now." The door closed behind her with a soft click. The blinds were drawn, the room dim and tense. Colonel Whitaker stood by the window, back turned, shoulders stiff. On his desk, an untouched glass of water trembled slightly in his hand. "Phantom 7, he muttered, as if testing the words against reality. "I thought you were a ghost story." Sarah said nothing. "Rumors," he continued. "A name whispered in debriefings, in places no one was supposed to talk about. Men who didn't come back used to say you were death itself, that you were a shadow no one ever saw coming." "I didn't expect anyone here to recognize it," she said softly. He turned then, eyes sharp and searching. "Afghanistan, 2010. His voice had lost its usual weight, replaced with something raw. "Helmand province. My unit was pinned down for 18 hours. Enemy fire on all sides. No extraction, no support. We were done." Sarah listened, expression unreadable. And then in the dead of night someone came. A team, small, silent. We never saw their faces, but they moved like ghosts, took out the enemy without a sound, pulled every single one of us out. He stepped closer, voice lowering to a whisper. There was one call sign, one name they feared more than any other. He stared into her eyes. "Phantom 7, that was you." Sarah's silence was answer enough. Whitaker sank into his chair, a man suddenly aware of the weight of the room he stood in. "You don't belong in logistics," he said finally. "You were deep black, off-the-books missions, places even I wasn't cleared to know about." Her eyes softened, not with pride, but with something closer to regret. "I was where they told me to be," she said. "I did what I had to do, but when the dust settled, they didn't need a hero, they needed a ghost, so I disappeared." "Why come back now?" he asked. She exhaled slowly, her hands tightening behind her back. "Because ghosts get tired, Colonel, and I didn't come back to fight a beat. I came back to rest." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the bass outside felt distant, muted. Whitaker studied her, this woman who had once been a myth, now standing in front of him wearing the plain uniform of a logistics officer. He wanted to say more, to ask, to demand, to understand, but something in her eyes stopped him. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much. 2 weeks later, the world refused to let her rest. A convoy carrying humanitarian supplies was ambushed in hostile territory. The attackers had taken hostages, among them, a young lieutenant barely 6 months out of the academy. The mission to recover them was deemed too dangerous. Even the most seasoned units hesitated. The room buzzed with uneasy silence as maps and intel feeds projected across the walls. Losses were being calculated, risks debated. Every plan ended the same way. Too many dead, too little chance. And then from the back of the room, a voice broke through. "I'll go." Heads turned. Sarah stood there, calm and steady. "I know the terrain. I know how to get in and out without leaving a trace." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "This isn't your fight anymore." "With respect, sir," she said, eyes steady. "It's always been my fight." He hesitated. He knew the cost of letting her go, the risk, the exposure. But he also knew that if anyone could bring them back alive, it was her. Finally he nodded. "Go, but take a team." Sarah shook her head. "A team makes noise," she said. "Phantom 7 doesn't." That night the ghost came back to life. The desert wind cut cold against her face as she moved under the cover of darkness. Her breathing slowed, her heartbeat steady, every sense sharpened as if no time had passed at all. She slipped past enemy patrols like smoke, silent and unseen. A guard stepped out from the shadows. He never had time to shout. Another turned to light a cigarette. He didn't finish the motion. The camp was alive with gunmen and watchtowers. but none of them saw the shadow weaving between the light. Inside a makeshift prison tent, the young lieutenant sat trembling, head bowed. He flinched at the sound of the door creaking open, expecting another interrogator. Instead, a figure crouched before him, a finger pressed to her lips. "Stay quiet," she whispered. "We're leaving." Within minutes, the restraints were cut. They moved through the night, one careful step at a time, hearts pounding, breaths shallow. Not a single shot was fired. Not a single alarm was raised. And when they emerged from the darkness at the extraction point, the Marines waiting there stared in stunned silence. Sarah walked out of the shadows, the lieutenant alive and unscathed beside her. Colonel Whitaker was waiting. Under the dim red glow of the field lights, their eyes met. "Phantom 7, he said softly. "I told you," she replied. "I didn't come back to fight," a pause, "but sometimes the fight finds you." They didn't speak of it in the official reports. Her name wasn't written in any commendation, nor spoken in any debriefing. But among the Marines, the whispers began again. Phantom 7 was real. And she walked among them. Whitaker carried the knowledge in silence, a secret he would never betray. But every time he saw her, standing quietly at the edge of the parade ground, blending in with the nameless crowd, he felt both awe and sorrow. Because men and women like her never truly left the shadows. They lived in the space between battles. They carried scars no one could see. And though the world might never know her sacrifice, those who had seen her would never forget. Sometimes legends don't announce themselves. They wear plain uniforms. They stand quietly. And when someone demands their call sign, they speak a name that makes even the bravest freeze. Why did the nightmares always come back when the world was finally quiet? Sarah's eyes snapped open in the darkness of her quarters, her breath shallow, her heart drumming in her chest. The base around her was silent, save for the distant hum of generators and the faint clatter of boots on night patrol. But in her mind, the silence was shattered by memories that refused to stay buried. The helicopter rotors above. The flash of gunfire in a narrow alley. The weight of a friend's body going limp in her arms. It had been years since Helmand. Years since she had been more than a name on a classified page. But sleep still betrayed her, dragging her back into places where ghosts screamed and blood soaked the dust. She rubbed her hands over her face, trying to steady herself. It was 400. Another night of less than 3 hours rest. Another night where the demons clawed their way back into the light. She wasn't sure why she had thought coming back to the Corps would be different. Maybe some part of her had believed the uniform would make the memories behave. That the monotony of supply chain reports and convoy schedules would lull the past back into silence. It hadn't. If anything, the mission, the rescue, had woken something up. Phantom 7, the part of her that had been buried beneath layers of denial and fatigue, was stirring again. And the world had noticed. 3 days after the operation, an unmarked envelope slid under Colonel Whitaker's door. No name, no insignia, just a single sheet of paper inside, stamped with a crest neither of them wanted to see. Special Activities Division, Classified Inquiry, Operation Phantom. Whitaker had read the memo twice before calling her in. "They know," he said simply as she entered his office. Sarah took the folder from his hand and read the brief. The words were simple, sterile, but they hit like a hammer. Requesting reassignment of Operative Phantom 7 to Task Force Scepter. Mission parameters, eyes only, level Omega clearance. "Task Force Scepter," she muttered. "I thought they were dissolved." "So did I," Whitaker replied, leaning against the edge of his desk. "But if they're reaching out, it means something big's brewing, and they want you back." Sarah closed the folder slowly. "I'm not interested." Whitaker's eyes softened, but there was steel beneath the sympathy. "It's not a request. This is Washington calling the shots now. The rescue drew attention, high places. They're pulling old files, reactivating old assets." I'm not an asset, she said flatly. He sighed, I know, but to them you always will be. 2 days later, a transport jet lifted off from Okinawa under the cover of darkness. Sarah sat in the back, duffel at her feet, staring at the floor as the vibration of the engines hummed through her bones. She hadn't worn that uniform, in years. The black combat fatigues of Scepter's covert division felt heavier than they had before. The insignia patch, an obsidian dagger over a silent crescent, was sewn into her sleeve once again. Across from her sat a man she hadn't seen in over a decade. "Still can't sleep on flights, can you?" he said with a faint smile. Sarah looked up, her lips curling into something almost like recognition. "Still talk too much, Mason." Agent Mason Hale, Scepter operative, field strategist, and one of the few people who had ever seen Phantom 7 work up close, hadn't aged a day past the cocky grin and cold precision she remembered. But there was something different in his eyes now. A weight, perhaps. A knowledge of the cost they both carried. "They told me they'd never find you," he said. "Said you'd gone dark for good, but when I saw the rescue report," he shook his head, "I knew it had to be you." "It wasn't supposed to be," she replied. "Nothing ever is." They sat in silence after that. Mason didn't press further. He knew better. Phantom 7 didn't like questions. The jet touched down on a forward operating base somewhere in Eastern Europe, location undisclosed, as always. The chill in the air bit at her skin as she stepped onto the tarmac, the wind carrying the faint metallic scent of rain and gun oil. Inside the secure compound, a digital map glowed across the wall of the briefing room. Faces she didn't recognize sat around the table, analysts, strategists, commanders. And at the center of them all, a man she did recognize. Director Alan Carrington. Once the head of Special Operations Command, now the architect of Task Force Scepter. His hair had gone grayer, but his voice still carried the same iron weight. "Phantom 7, he said as she entered, "welcome back." "I'm not back," Sarah replied. "I'm temporary." Carrington smirked. "That's what you said in 2009 and 2011 and again in Syria." She said nothing. He tapped the console, and the map zoomed in, a red sector blinking ominously across a mountainous border. "Codename, Operation Glass Veil," he said. "A rogue paramilitary unit calling itself Red Hydra has taken over a decommissioned missile facility. We have credible intel they're attempting to repurpose launch systems for a chemical payload. If they succeed, they'll have the range to hit civilian targets across 3 NATO states." "And where do I fit into this?" "You don't, not yet," Carrington said. "We're sending an Alpha team to establish forward recon and sabotage capabilities. Your job is simple: extraction. If the mission goes south, you get them out." Sarah frowned. "You don't call in Phantom 7 for extraction." Carrington's eyes hardened. "We do when we're not telling you everything." The room went quiet. Sarah glanced at Mason. He gave a small, knowing nod. There was more to this, there always was. The insertion point was 30 miles from the target. The terrain was hostile, dense forests, jagged ridgelines, and villages known for sympathizing with Red Hydra. The team moved under the cover of darkness, silent and deliberate. Sarah was at the rear, watching, calculating. Every shadow, every movement, every sound mattered. Old habits slipped back into place with disturbing ease. They set up a forward hide on a ridge overlooking the facility. Through her scope, Sarah saw the compound, rusted fences, old Soviet-era structures now crawling with armed guards. Something about the security layout bothered her. It was too clean, too organized, too deliberate. "This isn't a militia," she muttered into the comms. "This is military trained." "Copy that," Mason replied. "We're going to need updated recon, moving to secondary position." They split into 2-man teams. Sarah and Mason advanced along a narrow ravine, the ground damp under their boots. The moonlight filtered through skeletal branches above. Halfway down the slope, Mason froze. "Contact," he whispered. Sarah dropped to a knee, scanning. Through the NVGs, she saw them patrols but not local fighters. The gear, the formation, the silent signals. These weren't mercenaries. They were professionals. Her chest tightened. A memory, uninvited, flickered in the back of her mind. A mission in Damascus, years ago, where the enemy wasn't who they thought they were. Where an op had gone sideways because they had been the target. And then she saw it. A marking on one of the soldiers' rifles, a small, distinct symbol, a serpent coiled around a dagger. Red Hydra wasn't just a rogue unit. It was a splinter group from an organization she had crossed once before, and they hadn't forgotten her. "Pull back," she whispered, "now." But it was too late. The forest erupted with gunfire. The ambush was precise, surgical, the kind of trap laid by someone who knew exactly how she operated. Bullets chewed through tree bark as Sarah and Mason dove behind cover. The rest of the team was pinned down 2 clicks north, and comms were jammed. "This was never about the missile facility," Mason shouted over the roar of automatic fire. "They knew we were coming." "They knew I was coming," she said grimly. They fought their way through the ravine, every step a dance between life and death. Sarah's movements were instinctive, controlled bursts, calculated shifts, a predator slipping through the chaos. But as they pushed deeper into the forest, a chilling realization set in. This wasn't an ambush, it was a message. And it was meant for her. Hours later, as the sun bled orange over the horizon, the survivors of Alpha Team regrouped at the extraction site. 4 men were missing. 1 was confirmed dead. The mission was a disaster, but it was also a revelation. "This wasn't about the payload," Mason said quietly, staring at the casualty reports. "They lured us here." Sarah nodded. Her hands trembled as she unzipped a recovered pack and pulled out a single sealed envelope. Inside was a photograph, grainy but unmistakable. It showed her in Afghanistan, years ago, standing next to a captured insurgent leader. On the back, a single line was scrawled in red ink. "Ghosts don't hide forever." She stared at the words for a long time, her heartbeat steady but heavy. Someone from her past, someone she thought was long gone, was still out there, and they had unfinished business. For the first time since she'd returned to uniform, Sarah felt something she hadn't in years. Not fear. Purpose. The world she'd tried so hard to leave behind had found her again. And this time, it wasn't content with whispers and shadows. It was coming for her, loud, deliberate, and personal. And deep down, she knew one unshakable truth. Ghosts might grow tired, but they don't run. They rise. Who had sent that photograph, and why now after all these years? The question stalked Sarah like a shadow she couldn't shake. The image lay on the table before her in the dim light of the forward operating base, its edges worn from the number of times she had turned it over in her hands. The man in the picture, bound, bloodied and kneeling in the dust beside her younger self, had been one of her most critical captures. Called Alheron, a warlord strategist and one of the architects of the insurgency that had nearly torn Helmand province apart. She remembered every detail of that operation, the chaos, the blood, the screaming, and the silence that followed when the dust finally settled. Haron had been taken alive, or so she'd been told. But if he was the message, then maybe he hadn't stayed that way. Mason stepped into the room quietly, breaking the stillness. "You've been staring at that photo for 2 hours, he said. Sarah didn't look up. "Did you find anything?" He nodded grimly. "Red Hydra's comm traffic spiked 3 days before we arrived. Satellite intercepts show encrypted transmissions routed through eastern Syria, Turkey, and here, the kicker, Berlin." "Berlin," she repeated, frowning. "Someone's funding them. Someone with access, coordination, and a lot of money. Hydra's not a rogue militia anymore. They're part of something bigger." Sarah pushed the photograph away and stood, packing slowly. Bigger doesn't scare me, familiar does. Mason's expression softened. You think it's him, don't you? She hesitated. It can't be. He was supposed to be in custody, transferred to The Hague for trial. Mason leaned against the wall. People like Helmand don't stay caged forever. They get traded, they get disappeared, they get used. And if he's out, he's not just looking to rebuild. He's looking for you. Sarah stared at the map pinned to the wall, the expanding web of Hydra's influence, red lines stretching across borders like veins. And at the center of it all, a ghost from her past, tugging at the edges of everything she tried to leave behind. The next morning, Carrington convened a closed-door briefing. The room was darker than usual, the mood heavier. Operation Glass Veil is officially suspended, he announced. Alpha Team is being reassigned to defensive ops while we assess the situation. What about the hostages we lost? Mason asked sharply. We don't have the intel to mount a rescue, Carrington replied. Not yet. Sarah felt a flicker of anger rise in her chest. Not yet, the two words she had heard too many times before. They always meant never, unless someone was willing to do what others wouldn't. And the message, she asked, the photograph. Carrington's eyes shifted to her, heavy with meaning. That wasn't meant for us. It was meant for you, which means this isn't about Scepter or Hydra or geopolitics. It's personal. Then make it personal, Sarah said quietly. The room fell silent. Mason glanced at her. He knew that tone. It was the same voice she had used before some of their most dangerous operations. Calm, measured, unflinching. Carrington studied her for a long moment. What are you proposing? Bait, she said. They want Phantom 7. Let's give them a reason to come out. It wasn't an official mission. It wasn't even sanctioned. The paperwork would never exist. The orders would never be signed. But within 24 hours, a plan was set into motion, one that would take Sarah deeper into the field than she'd gone in years. The intelligence pointed to a possible Hydra cell operating out of an abandoned factory complex near the Black Sea. It was a logistics node, weapons, communications, smuggling routes. More importantly, it was where Hydra had been moving personnel in the weeks leading up to the ambush. If Helmand was truly behind it, this was where she'd draw him out. Mason protested the plan at first. This isn't a recon sweep, Sarah. It's a death trap. Then it's the right place to start, she replied. They deployed with a skeleton team, just 4 operators, including Mason and Sarah. The insertion was silent, low altitude under radar. They moved on foot the last 6 kilometers, cutting through wet grass and fractured concrete until the skeletal outline of the factory loomed ahead. The place was empty, too empty. Cracked windows stared back like hollow eyes. Rusted machinery groaned in the wind. But Sarah felt it in her bones. They were being watched. Something's wrong, Mason whispered. Stay sharp, she replied. They advanced through the main floor, weapons raised, eyes sweeping every shadow. Then, without warning, the overhead lights flickered on. A dozen laser dots painted across their chests. Drop your weapons, a voice boomed from above, slowly. Sarah's grip tightened on her rifle. The accent was familiar Arabic, tinged with a Turkish lilt, and then she saw him. Descending the iron stairs with the calm arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable, Khalid al-Harun stepped into view. His hair was grayer now, his face lined with age, but the cold intelligence in his eyes was exactly as she remembered. Phantom 7, he said, spreading his arms. At last. Mason cursed under his breath. It's him. Sarah lowered her weapon, keeping her expression unreadable. You should be dead. Ah, Harun said with a small smile, so should you, and yet here we are. He walked closer, flanked by armed men, his gaze locked on her. I've waited a long time for this moment. The Americans took everything from me, my cause, my people, my name. But you took my soul. You gave it up the day you started slaughtering civilians, she replied coldly. He laughed a deep, chilling sound. Still the righteous soldier, but tell me, does your righteousness keep you warm at night? Does it silence the ghosts? Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. I offered you a chance back then, Haron continued. A chance to walk away. You refused, and because of that I lost everything. Now you will understand what that means. With a snap of his fingers, two guards dragged a man into the open. One of the missing Alpha team members, bloodied and beaten but alive. This is just the beginning, Haron said. For every life you ruined, I will ruin one of yours, piece by piece. Let him go, Sarah said. Oh, I will, Haron replied, after you come with me. The room tensed. Mason shifted slightly, his finger brushing the trigger of his sidearm. Sarah shook her head subtly. Not yet. I'm not here to surrender, she said. No, Haron said softly, you're here to die. The firefight erupted with brutal precision. Sarah dove behind a support pillar as rounds tore through the air. Mason dragged the wounded operator to cover while the rest of the team returned fire. Haron's men were well-trained, ex-military, mercenaries, possibly even intelligence contractors. But they weren't prepared for Phantom 7. Sarah moved like smoke, a blur of calculated violence. She disarmed one guard with a twist of the wrist, turned his weapon on another, then melted back into the shadows. Every shot was deliberate, every movement economical. Mason called out over the comms, "Extraction window in 6 minutes." "Too long," she replied. "We finish this now." The gunfire thinned as bodies hit the floor. But when the smoke cleared, Haron was gone. A reinforced door on the far side of the factory hung open, a tunnel leading into the darkness beyond. "He's running," Mason shouted. "Then we chase," Sarah said, already moving. The tunnel was narrow, twisting, an old smuggling route repurposed as an escape corridor. Footsteps echoed ahead. She pushed harder, her lungs burning, heart hammering. Then suddenly she stopped. A motion sensor, a tripwire, a trap. She froze, every instinct screaming. Carefully, she disabled the trigger and moved on. But the delay had cost her. By the time she reached the end of the tunnel, Haron was gone. Only a single, flickering tablet screen lay on a crate, a message playing on a loop. "You should have killed me when you had the chance. Now the game begins." Her reflection stared back from the dark screen. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar rising in her chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was resolve. Haron had resurfaced for a reason, and whatever game he was planning, she would be ready. Back at base, Carrington's face was grim. "We've confirmed Haron's alive. Worse, he's building something. Financing, recruiting, coordinating. Hydra is just the tip of the spear." "And we're the target," Mason added. "No," Sarah said quietly, "I'm the target." The room fell silent. Carrington leaned forward. "Then it's time to turn that into an advantage. We don't hunt Hydra, we hunt him." Sarah looked out the window into the cold, dark night. Somewhere out there, a man she should have left dead was gathering strength. Somewhere out there, the ghosts of her past were writing the next chapter of her story. She had tried to rest, tried to disappear, but the shadows had come calling. And now Phantom 7 was done hiding. Why was she hesitating? The question echoed in Sarah's head as she stared at the satellite feed glowing on the wall of the operations center. Red Hydra supply convoys were on the move, slipping across borders under the guise of humanitarian shipments, vanishing into the shadows of failed states and conflict zones. Each route led to the same conclusion. Haron wasn't hiding. He was building. And every instinct told her she was already running out of time. But she couldn't move yet. Not until she understood why, after all these years, Haron had resurfaced, and why he had chosen her as the centerpiece of his twisted plan. "Are you going to say something?" Mason asked, leaning against the console beside her. "Or are we just going to keep staring at the same dots on a map?" Sarah didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked a convoy moving through a stretch of northern Georgia, a remote route that, according to satellite imagery, led to a decommissioned Soviet research facility. "That's where he's going," she murmured. Mason followed her gaze. "You're sure?" "Convoy doesn't move without purpose," she replied. "They're taking supplies to build something, and if Hydra's pattern holds, they're not stockpiling, they're staging." Staging for what? She didn't answer, she didn't have to. 2 hours later, the operations center was buzzing with movement. The team's analysts worked around the clock, sifting through comm intercepts, trade records, and drone imagery. What they found sent a chill through the room. Buried beneath the facility was a weapons development lab, sealed since the late 90s, when it was rumored to have been part of a Soviet-era bioweapons program. If Hydra had taken control of it. "This isn't about missiles anymore," Carrington said grimly during the next briefing. "They're after something much worse, something they can weaponize without detection." "VX Sarin?" Mason asked. Maybe worse," Carrington replied. "We don't have confirmation yet, but whatever it is, Haron wants it operational, and he's close." A map flickered on the screen, concentric circles radiating out from the facility, showing potential contamination spread in the event of a chemical release. It reached cities, civilian centers, hospitals. "Intel suggests final assembly in 12 days, Carrington continued. "If they succeed, containment won't be possible." 12 days. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her chest. That wasn't a mission window, it was a countdown. The hunt began in earnest. Sarah and Mason deployed to Istanbul under civilian cover, the first step in tracking the supply chain fueling Hydra's operation. It was a city she knew well, a labyrinth of alleys and waterways, a crossroads of secrets. The plan was simple: intercept the brokers handling Hydra's shipments and flip one before the cargo reached Georgia. But simple plans rarely stayed that way. Their contact, a former GRU logistics officer named Volkov, was late. 10 minutes became 20. 20 became 40. And then, finally, he appeared, not at the cafe where they were supposed to meet, but on the floor of a back-alley warehouse, blood pooling beneath him. "Ambush," Mason muttered, crouching beside the body. "They're one step ahead." Sarah scanned the room, signs of a struggle, shell casings, drag marks. Whoever did this had taken Volkov's data drives. "Check the security feeds," she said. There was nothing. The cameras had been disabled 20 minutes before the hit. That wasn't coincidence. "They knew we were coming," Mason said. "No," Sarah whispered, the weight of realization sinking in. "They knew I was coming." That night, alone in her safe house overlooking the Bosphorus, Sarah stood by the window and watched the city lights shimmer against the dark water. She hated Istanbul, not because of the city itself, but because of the memories it carried. It was here 8 years ago that Phantom 7 had made one of her hardest calls. A mission to dismantle a weapons ring had gone sideways. Intelligence had been faulty, the enemy one step ahead. And in the chaos, a civilian asset, a mother of two who had been feeding them information, had been caught in the crossfire. Sarah could still see her face, the fear, the betrayal, and the silence that followed when the news reached her family. She had told herself then that she was doing the right thing, that one life was a small price to pay to save hundreds. But the guilt had never left. It lived beneath her skin, deep and unrelenting. Harold knew that, and now he was using it against her. "Still awake?" Mason's voice cut through the silence. He stepped into the room, 2 mugs of bitter instant coffee in his hands. "You're terrible at stealth," she said without turning. "I stopped trying around the same time you started staring out of windows for hours," he replied. "Talk to me, Sarah." She sighed. "He's not just trying to kill me, Mason. He's trying to break me." "Then don't let him." "It's not that simple." "Sure it is." He handed her the mug. "Your Phantom 7, the one ghosts whisper about, The one insurgents fear. You've been through worse." She shook her head. "This isn't a mission, it's penance." "Then finish it," he said quietly. "Make it mean something." She stared at him, a flicker of something, pain, maybe gratitude, passing behind her eyes. Mason had been there since the beginning. He'd seen her at her best and her worst. And though he'd never said it aloud, she knew the truth. He had stayed all these years not out of duty, but because he believed she could still be more than a ghost. 3 days later, a break came from an unexpected source. A Hydra courier intercepted at a border checkpoint in Armenia had been carrying an encrypted data module. Most of it was gibberish, false leads, decoy routes. But one coordinate stood out: a safe house deep in the Caucasus Mountains. "Could be nothing," Carrington warned. "Could be a trap." "It's always a trap," Sarah replied. "That's why we have to go." The safe house was carved into the side of a cliff, a relic from Cold War intelligence days, accessible only by a narrow mountain pass. The team approached under heavy snowfall, visibility low, comms patchy. Inside, they found what they'd been hoping for and dreading. A war room, digital maps, schedules, and at the center of it all, blueprints for a dispersal device, something that could aerosolize a chemical agent across miles of territory. "VX hybrid," Mason muttered, scanning the files. "Weaponized payload capacity, catastrophic." But it wasn't the weapon that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was the signature at the bottom of the schematic, a code name she knew well. Project Seraph. Her project. Back when she was still Phantom 7, she had helped dismantle Seraph, a rogue CIA black project designed to preempt chemical warfare threats. It was supposed to have been destroyed. And yet, here it was, resurrected and twisted by Helmand. "Son of a," Mason exhaled. "He's using our playbook." Sarah stared at the blueprint, a hollow feeling sinking into her chest. "No, he's using mine." They returned to base with the evidence, and the mood turned grave. "Timeline's shorter than we thought," Carrington said. "Assembly could be complete in 9 days, maybe less. And now we know what they're building. We're looking at a potential bioweapon deployment." "Where?" Mason asked. Carrington hesitated. "We don't know." The room went silent. Sarah stepped forward. "Then we find out. No more waiting for intel to come to us. We go after Hydra's leadership, cut the head off the snake." Carrington studied her, then nodded slowly. "You'll have full discretion. But Sarah, if you do this, there's no turning back. This becomes your mission." "It already is," she said. That night Sarah sat alone in the mission prep room, disassembling and cleaning her sidearm, a ritual that calmed her nerves before every operation. But tonight, her hands trembled slightly. Mason found her there, as he always did. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't look up. "Do you ever think about the people we've lost, the ones who didn't come back?" "All the time," he said, "but I also think about the ones who did." "I keep wondering if I made a mistake," she whispered. "All those years I told myself I was saving lives, but maybe all I did was trade one death for another." Mason crouched in front of her, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Listen to me. You can't change the past, but you can make sure it means something. And right now, you're the only one who can stop what's coming." She nodded slowly. "Then that's what I'll do." Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the ground in a cold, quiet hush. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Helmand was assembling the final pieces of his plan. Somewhere, a weapon born from her own mistakes was about to be unleashed. But Phantom 7 was awake now. And this time she wasn't running from her past, she was hunting it. Because ghosts don't haunt the living out of anger. They do it to warn them, to finish what they couldn't before. And Sarah Keating, the woman the world thought was gone, was about to finish what she started. How do you hunt a man who is already hunting you? That question gnawed at Sarah as she stared at the mission board spread across the operations table. Dozens of photographs, Intercepted comm logs and satellite shots were pinned in overlapping layers, a web of movement, deception, and dead ends. At the center of it all, Helmand. He was always one step ahead, always watching, always waiting. 9 days. That was the estimate. 9 days before Project Seraph went live. 9 days before the chemical payload could reach civilian populations. 9 days before every ghost she'd buried in the past clawed its way back into the light. And the worst part was, she wasn't sure if she was doing this to save lives or to save herself. "Timeline's shrinking," Mason said, walking into the room with a fresh stack of field reports. "They moved another shipment across the border last night. Heavy shielding. Whatever they're carrying, it's volatile." Sarah didn't look up. "They're close. Too close." He laid a file in front of her. "We've got a lead," Chatter points to a forward command hub in the Tavish Valley. "If we take it down, we cut off their comms and slow their logistics." "It's not Helmand," she said flatly. "No," Mason admitted, "but it gets us closer." Sarah traced a finger along the map. The hub was buried deep in mountainous terrain, heavily guarded and well supplied. A frontal assault would be suicide, but a surgical strike, small team, precision entry could cripple Hydra's coordination. "I'll lead the team," she said. Mason sighed. "I knew you'd say that." The insertion was brutal. A cold wind howled through the mountain passes as their helicopter hugged the terrain, rotors slicing through thin air. Snow whipped against the fuselage, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Inside, the team sat silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah closed her eyes, forcing her breathing into a steady rhythm. The weight of the mission pressed down on her chest, but beneath it was something heavier: doubt. Was she chasing Helmand or chasing redemption? 30 seconds, the pilot called. Sarah checked her gear one last time. Rifle loaded, sidearm secure, comms encrypted, every piece of kit meticulously placed because in her line of work, small mistakes killed. "Let's move," she said. The team repelled into the darkness, boots crunching into fresh snow. The command hub loomed ahead, a cluster of prefab structures tucked against the cliffside, ringed by sentry towers and motion sensors. Floodlights swept across the perimeter like cold, mechanical eyes. "Two-man patrol north side," Mason whispered through comms. "Thermal shows 6 heat signatures inside the main building." "Copy," Sarah replied. "We go silent." They moved like shadows. One sentry turned to light a cigarette, a soft thud, and he crumpled soundlessly into the snow. Another reached for his radio, a flash of steel, and his body slumped forward before the signal could escape his lips. Within minutes, the perimeter was breached. Inside the command structure, the hum of electronics filled the room. Servers blinked. Screens glowed with streams of encrypted data. Sarah accessed the main terminal, fingers flying across the keys. "Got something," she muttered. "Routing schedules, shipment manifests, and a secondary target location." Mason leaned over her shoulder. "Where?" Her heart skipped a beat. "Baku, Azerbaijan." Mason frowned. "Why Baku?" "It's not the launch site," she said. "It's the assembly site. That's where the payload is going." The exfiltration didn't go as planned. As they moved back toward the extraction point, the night erupted in gunfire. Searchlights blazed across the valley. Hydra reinforcements, far more than Intel had predicted, poured into the area. "Contact West Ridge," Mason shouted. "Move," Sarah barked. They sprinted through the snow, returning fire in controlled bursts. The radio crackled with distorted chatter as bullets tore into the ground around them. One of the operators went down, hit in the shoulder. Sarah dragged him behind cover, adrenaline flooding her veins. "Eagle 1, we need immediate exfil," Mason yelled into the comms. "Negative," came the reply. "LZ is hot, too much ground fire." Sarah scanned the tree line. They were pinned. If they stayed, they'd be surrounded. If they ran, they'd be cut down. "Tunnel," she said suddenly. "What?" "The old supply tunnel east side of the ridge. It should connect to the canyon. We can reach a secondary evac point." Mason hesitated. "That's a kilometer out." "Then we run." They broke from cover in a blur of motion, weaving through gunfire and smoke. The snow beneath their boots was slick with mud and blood. Every second felt like a lifetime. One by one, the team slipped into the tunnel, a narrow concrete artery that twisted beneath the valley floor. The echo of boots on wet stone was the only sound. "Talk to me," Mason said between breaths. "You good?" "Never better," Sarah muttered. It wasn't true. She was exhausted physically, mentally, spiritually. Every mission took a piece of her, and this one felt like it was taking more than most. But she couldn't stop. Not now, not when Helmand was so close. They emerged into the canyon just as the exfil chopper roared overhead. The team clambered aboard, the rotors kicking up a storm of snow and dust as they lifted off into the night. "Target neutralized," Carrington's voice came through the comms. "Affirmative," Sarah replied. "We've got location intel. The assembly site is in Baku." "Then that's where we go next." The flight back to base was quiet. Mason sat across from her, studying her face. "You're running yourself into the ground," he said finally. "I'm fine." "You're lying." Sarah sighed, rubbing her hands over her face. "Do you ever think about how this ends, Mason? Not just this mission, all of it." "All the time," he said. "And I keep coming to the same conclusion. People like us don't get endings. We just get next missions." "I used to believe that," she whispered. "But lately I'm not so sure." He leaned forward. "You're not doing this just for the mission, are you?" She hesitated. "I need to finish it for them, for the ones who didn't make it back, for the ones whose names no one remembers." "And for you," Mason said softly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The mission to Baku was classified even by Scepter standards. Only 4 operatives were cleared: Sarah, Mason, and 2 others. Their orders were simple: infiltrate the facility, identify the payload, and neutralize the threat. But Sarah knew better. Nothing about this was going to be simple. They entered the city under deep cover, posing as aid contractors. Surveillance footage and intercepted comms had confirmed Hydra's presence in an abandoned industrial complex on the outskirts of town, a maze of old warehouses now humming with new activity. From a rooftop vantage point 2 kilometers away, Sarah scanned the facility through her scope. "Guards on every entrance," Mason said beside her. "Thermals picking up heavy movement inside. This isn't a lab, it's a fortress." "Then we treat it like one," she said. The infiltration began under the cover of night. Scaling the outer wall, they slipped past patrols and cut through the security perimeter. The air inside smelled of oil, rust, and chemicals, the unmistakable scent of something that should never be weaponized. Sarah led the way through a maze of corridors, her senses heightened, every nerve on fire. Then, in the depths of the facility, she saw it. The device. Cylindrical, polished, almost beautiful in its horror. The dispersal system was far more advanced than she had feared, capable of aerosolizing the payload within minutes of deployment. And beside it, hunched over a console, was a figure she had prayed she'd never see again. "Helmand," she whispered. He turned slowly, as if he'd been expecting her all along. "Right on schedule," he said. "I was beginning to think you lost your touch." Sarah raised her weapon. "It ends here." Helmand smiled faintly. "Oh, Phantom 7, it's only just beginning." The blast wave hit before she could react. The floor buckled. Concrete rained from the ceiling. Smoke swallowed the room in seconds. "Ambush," Mason shouted. Hydra operatives poured in from every direction. Gunfire roared. The facility erupted into chaos. Sarah dove for cover, heart hammering. Helmand had anticipated this. He had planned for her just as he always did. And for the first time in years, she felt doubt clawing at the edges of her resolve. "Fall back," Mason yelled. "Not without the payload," she shouted back. "Sarah, it's a trap, he's baiting you." "I don't care." She pushed forward through the smoke, firing as she moved. Every step brought her closer to the dispersal device and closer to Helmand, but when the haze cleared, he was gone. Again. All that remained was a digital countdown blinking red on the console. 00:14:32. 14 minutes. That was all they had before the weapon went live. The next 15 minutes would define everything. Her mission, her redemption, her very identity. Phantom 7 wasn't just a call sign, it was a promise. And she was about to keep it. How do you stop time when every second is a countdown to disaster? The red digits on the console burned into Sarah's vision, 00:14:32, ticking down toward catastrophe. The air in the facility was heavy with smoke and gunpowder. Sirens wailed in shrill alarm. Somewhere deep within the structure, turbines rumbled as the dispersal system spun to life. 14 minutes, Mason shouted over the chaos. "We need to move now." Sarah slammed a fresh magazine into her rifle and scanned the room. Hydra soldiers poured through the corridors, their muzzle flashes cutting jagged arcs through the dark. She fired in controlled bursts, dropping 2 before they reached the barricade. "Cover left flank," she ordered. "I'm going for the payload controls." Mason grabbed her arm. "Sarah, that's suicide, they'll box you in." "I don't have a choice," she yelled, shaking free. "If that thing goes live, nothing else matters." The hallway to the dispersal chamber was a gauntlet. Concrete walls exploded under the hail of bullets. Sparks flew from shattered light fixtures. Sarah moved like a wraith, low, fast, precise, weaving through gunfire with the practiced instinct of someone who'd spent half her life walking the edge between life and death. Every step closer made her chest tighten. Every breath reminded her of what was at stake. This wasn't just another mission. This wasn't just about stopping Helmand. This was about redemption. For the civilians who died in Helmand. For the informant in Istanbul. For every name etched into the dark corners of her memory. And for the version of herself she had once been, the one who believed she could disappear and never look back. "Control room, 12 o'clock, Mason's voice crackled in her earpiece. "On it," she replied, vaulting over a fallen crate and kicking open a steel door. Inside, the chamber pulsed with cold, blue light. The dispersal unit loomed in the center, a cylindrical tower of composite metal and reinforced glass, connected to a network of pipes and conduits. A low, mechanical hum filled the air as the device powered up. Sarah sprinted to the terminal and began typing commands, overriding safeties and cycling through subsystems. Lines of code scrolled across the screen: chemical pressure calibration, dispersal sequence initiation, fail-safe bypass. Whoever had programmed it knew exactly what they were doing. "Talk to me," Mason demanded. "I can't stop the countdown," she hissed. "It's running on a remote trigger. Even if I shut this system down, they can launch it externally." "Can you disarm it manually?" "Maybe, but I need to get to the dispersal core." "Then go, I'll hold them off." The core chamber was 3 levels down, buried beneath layers of blast shielding. Sarah forced open the access hatch and descended a maintenance ladder into the belly of the beast. Steam hissed from ruptured valves. Red warning lights strobed overhead. The deeper she went, the louder the hum became, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the skin of a monster. At the bottom she found it, a sealed containment unit the size of a small car, housing a volatile cocktail of engineered VX hybrid. Even through the reinforced glass, she could feel the danger radiating off it. One mistake here wouldn't just kill everyone in the facility. It would start a war. "Okay," she whispered, steadying her breath. "One step at a time." She pried open the outer panel and exposed the primary control node, a tangle of fiber optic lines and micro-relays. The remote trigger was encrypted, but if she severed the right connection before the final sequence initiated, she could stall the dispersal. The timer read 00:08:46. "Come on," she muttered, hands working fast. "Talk to me, you bastard." A footstep echoed behind her. She turned, weapon raised, and froze. Harold stood at the base of the ladder, calm as ever, a pistol leveled at her chest. "Still trying to save the world," he said, his voice eerily serene. "Still clinging to the illusion that you can undo what you've done." "Drop it," Sarah snapped. "Now." He chuckled. "You and I both know you won't shoot. Not here. Not with a volatile agent less than 2 meters from your barrel." Her finger tightened on the trigger anyway. "Try me." Harold circled the chamber slowly, almost wistfully. "Do you know what the difference is between you and me, Phantom 7? You kill for a flag, I kill for a cause, but in the end the result is the same. Bodies, ruins, grief. Don't you dare compare us." "Oh, but I must," he said, stepping closer. "Because you made me. That day in Helmand you could have ended me, but you didn't. You paraded me before the cameras. You gave the world its villain and walked away thinking you were a hero." "I didn't walk away," she hissed. "I lived with every decision." "And so did I," he replied. "Every cell they tortured, every minute they interrogated, every life I watched burn because of what you did. That's when I understood justice is just another form of revenge, and I intend to return the favor." The timer hit 00:06:12. Sarah's pulse quickened. "Where's the remote trigger?" Harold smiled thinly. "Wouldn't you like to know?" "Tell me, and maybe I'll let you live." "Lie to yourself if you must," he said. "We both know how this ends." A burst of gunfire echoed above. Mason's voice cut through the comms. "Sarah, they're breaching the stairwell. I can't hold them." "Get out," she ordered. "Fall back to the evac point." "I'm not leaving without you." "That's an order." There was a long pause, then quietly, "Copy that." She turned back to Harold. "You're not leaving here alive." "Neither are you," he said calmly. And then he dropped the pistol. For a heartbeat she didn't understand until she saw the detonator in his other hand. A dead man's switch. One squeeze and the entire facility, including the payload, would vaporize. "Step away from the core," he said, "or we both go to hell." Sarah's mind raced. She was running out of time, out of options, out of everything. The only way to disarm the core was to get close, but one wrong move, and he'd end it all before she had the chance. "Why do this?" she asked, buying precious seconds. "What does killing thousands of civilians prove?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It proves that you failed, that the hero who thought she could save the world instead doomed it." The timer flashed 00:03:28. Sarah took a slow step forward. "You're not a cause, Harold, you're a coward, a broken man hiding behind vengeance." He sneered. "And you're a ghost, a weapon without a soul." "Maybe," she said, "but ghosts don't stop." Then she moved. In a blur of motion, she dropped low and rolled, grabbing a discarded wrench from the floor. Harold swung the detonator toward her, but she hurled the wrench with surgical precision, striking his wrist and sending the device skidding across the floor. He roared in anger and lunged. They collided near the core, grappling for control. His fists were heavy, brutal, fueled by hatred. Hers were precise, efficient, fueled by purpose. "Do you even know how many lives you've destroyed?" he shouted. "Enough to know I can still save some," she spat. With a surge of strength, she twisted his arm and slammed him against the console. The detonator lay within reach. She dove for it, grabbed it, and crushed it beneath her boot. The timer hit 00:01:42. There was no time left. She scrambled back to the control node and yanked open the secondary panel. Wires, circuits, and pressure regulators sprawled before her like a mechanical puzzle. Her hands moved instinctively, guided by muscle memory burned into her from years of training. "Come on," she whispered, "come on." Harold staggered to his feet, blood dripping from a gash above his eye. "You can't stop it." "Yes," she breathed, "I can." The timer flashed 000031. One final connection remained, a fiber line buried beneath the primary array. Severing it would shut down the dispersal cascade. But it was live, high voltage, unstable. If she cut it wrong, the chamber would explode. She inhaled slowly, fingers trembling. "Do it," she told herself, "do it now." She severed the line. The chamber went dark. The timer froze at 000007. Silence. Then slowly, systems across the facility powered down. The dispersal unit hissed, releasing its built-up pressure. The chemical agent was contained. The weapon was neutralized. It was over. Sarah sank to her knees, every muscle trembling, her breath ragged. She stared at the frozen numbers on the screen, 7 seconds between life and death, 7 seconds between annihilation and redemption. Harold slumped against the wall, laughing not with joy but with something darker. "You think you've won," he rasped. "This isn't over, you'll never stop what's coming." Sarah walked toward him, her boots echoing softly against the floor. "Maybe not," she said quietly, "but I stopped you." She pressed a tranquilizer injector against his neck. He struggled for a moment, then collapsed into unconsciousness. "Target secured," she whispered into her comms. "Payload contained." Hours later, as dawn broke over the Black Sea, Sarah stood outside the ruined facility, the rising sun painting the horizon gold. Mason approached, bandaged and exhausted, but alive. "7 seconds," he said, shaking his head. "You cut it closer than usual." "7 seconds is enough," she replied. "Command's ecstatic," he said. "They're calling you a hero." Sarah stared at the distant horizon, her expression unreadable. "Heroes go home when the fight over." "And ghosts?" Mason asked. She gave a faint, tired smile. "Ghosts keep walking." But deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't the end. Haron had been stopped, but the ideology he carried, the network he built, still pulsed in the shadows. And as long as that darkness existed, so would she. Phantom 7. The ghost who refused to die. What does a ghost do when the war is over? The question clung to Sarah like the smell of gunpowder that still lingered in her hair. It had been 3 days since the mission in Baku. 3 days since she stopped the weapon with 7 seconds to spare. 3 days since Haron, the man who had haunted her nightmares, was dragged into custody in restraints and silence. And yet peace refused to come. She stood alone on the balcony of a secure intelligence compound overlooking the Black Sea. Dawn bled softly into the horizon, painting the waves in muted gold. But the light didn't reach her. Not really. It stopped somewhere on the surface, unable to pierce the darkness she still carried inside. She had saved thousands, maybe millions, but all she could think about were the ones she hadn't. The families torn apart in Helmand. The civilians lost in Istanbul. The soldiers she couldn't bring home. Every name was a weight, pressing down on the space between her heartbeats. And now, with the mission over and the adrenaline gone, those ghosts had returned. Still awake, Mason's voice broke the silence. Sarah didn't turn. "Do you ever sleep?" "Not lately." He stepped beside her, holding 2 cups of bitter coffee. "You should be celebrating, you know. You saved a continent." "Did I?" she asked quietly. "Or did I just delay the inevitable?" He studied her for a moment. "You stopped a weapon of mass destruction. You captured a war criminal. That's more than most people do in a lifetime. And yet it doesn't feel like enough." "It never does," Mason said softly. "That's the curse of people like us. We don't get closure, we just get pauses." The debriefing later that morning was clinical, the kind of cold, precise evaluation Sarah despised. The room was filled with officials and analysts in suits too expensive for the places their decisions sent people to die. Screens replayed drone footage, tactical overlays, and extraction logs. Operative Keating, Director Carrington began, your actions in Baku prevented a catastrophic bioweapons incident and neutralized a top-tier threat actor. That's not just a success, it's a geopolitical victory. Sarah sat stiffly, saying nothing. Haron is currently in transit to a classified detention site, Carrington continued. He'll be interrogated under Tier 1 protocols. Early indications suggest Hydra's network may still be operational, but severely destabilized. May still be operational, Mason repeated. Translation, we've barely scratched the surface. Carrington sighed. We dismantled their leadership and captured their figurehead. That's a significant blow. It's not the head I'm worried about, Sarah said quietly. It's the heart. Carrington raised an eyebrow, meaning. Haron's network isn't just soldiers and money. It's ideology, and ideology doesn't die with a single arrest. The room fell silent. She wasn't wrong, and they all knew it. Carrington cleared his throat. Regardless, the president has requested a full commendation package for your actions. Congressional intelligence wants a closed-session briefing, and NATO Command is already drafting a joint statement of gratitude. Gratitude, she echoed almost to herself. Funny word. Most operators would kill for that kind of recognition, Carrington said. I didn't do it for recognition. Then why did you do it? The question hung in the air like smoke. Sarah opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. She didn't know, not anymore. Haron's interrogation began the next day. Sarah watched through one-way glass as a team of analysts and interrogators cycled through their questions. He sat calmly at the table, wrists cuffed, eyes sharp and unblinking. Who funded Hydra? No response. Where is the remaining stockpile? Silence. What are the network's current objectives? A faint mocking smile. He said nothing of substance. No threats, no boasts, just silence, deliberate, calculated, unnerving. After 12 hours, the lead interrogator stepped out of the room, exasperated. He's not breaking. Of course he's not, Sarah said. He's already won. The interrogator frowned. Won, he's in chains. He wanted to make this personal, she said, eyes still fixed on Haron through the glass. And he succeeded. He made me come to him. He dragged me out of hiding. He forced me back into this life. And now he knows that no matter what happens, I'll never walk away again. The interrogator hesitated. Do you want to go in? Sarah blinked. What? You're the only one he's responded to. Maybe you'll get him talking. Carrington's voice came from behind. It's risky, but it might work. Sarah stared at the door for a long moment. Every instinct told her it was a bad idea. And yet, some part of her needed to face him, not for the intel, not for the mission, for herself. Open the door, she said. The interrogation room was colder than she expected. Haron looked up as she entered, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Phantom 7, he said softly. I was wondering how long it would take. Sarah sat down across from him. You're going to tell me everything you know. Am I? Because if you don't, she said, leaning forward, you'll spend the rest of your life in a hole so deep the sun will forget your name. He chuckled. You think I fear death or darkness? I've lived in both for years. Then tell me what you do fear. He studied her for a long moment, then said quietly, irrelevance. The word caught her off guard. You and I, he continued, we are creatures of purpose. Without war, we are nothing. Without enemies, we are ghosts. You're wrong. Am I? Tell me, Lieutenant. If you take off the uniform tomorrow, if you walk away from the fight, who are you? Her jaw tightened, but she didn't answer. That's what I thought, he whispered. You need me as much as I need you. Sarah leaned closer. I need you to understand something. You don't get to define me, not anymore. Then why are you here? He asked. Why are you still fighting? She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. Because somebody has to. As she turned to leave, Haron called after her. The next ghost won't be so merciful. She didn't look back. Later that night, Sarah sat on the edge of her bunk, the conversation replaying in her mind. His words cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Without the mission, without the fight, who was she? It was a question she had avoided for years, but now it felt unavoidable. Mason knocked gently on the doorframe. You okay? Define okay. He stepped inside and sat beside her. You did what you were trained to do, what only you could do. And now what? She asked quietly. What happens when there's nothing left to fight? He was silent for a moment. Then maybe you stop fighting. She looked at him, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Do people like us ever stop? Maybe we don't, he admitted, but maybe we learn to live with the quiet. A week later, Sarah received her official orders. She was to return to Okinawa, her cover assignment reinstated, her record once again scrubbed clean. No medals, no commendations, no public recognition. Just silence. She stood on the tarmac as the transport plane's engines roared to life. The wind whipped at her hair, carrying with it the scent of salt and cold steel. Mason walked beside her, duffel slung over his shoulder. You could stay, he said. Join the command team, lead your own unit. She shook her head. That's not who I am. Then who are you? She thought about the question for a long time. Then she smiled, small, tired but real. Maybe I'm still figuring that out. Hours later, as the plane banked over the sea and the coastline disappeared behind her, Sarah stared out the window. The clouds stretched endlessly into the horizon, vast and unknowable. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know if she'd ever truly outrun the ghosts of her past. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the question. Because maybe ghosts didn't exist to haunt the living. Maybe they existed to remind them of what was lost, of what was worth saving, of what still mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Somewhere deep below, in a cell carved into bedrock, called Haron sat in silence. A faint smile crept across his face as a hidden microchip beneath his fingernail pulsed faintly, transmitting. The war wasn't over. Not yet. What happens to a soldier when the war finally ends? For Sarah Keating, the answer wasn't as simple as she once believed. It wasn't medals or ceremonies. It wasn't parades or speeches. It wasn't even peace. It was silence. And silence, she was learning, could be louder than any battlefield. 2 weeks had passed since Haron's capture. 2 weeks since the dispersal device was stopped with 7 seconds to spare. 2 weeks since the ghosts of her past had clawed their way back into the present. And now, Sarah was back in Okinawa, standing in the same place where it had all begun. The base was just as she remembered it. Recruits marched across the parade ground in perfect formation. Instructors barked commands with voices like thunder. And somewhere in the distance, the ocean wind carried the faint tang of salt and jet fuel. To everyone else, it was another ordinary day. But for Sarah, nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. She walked slowly across the tarmac, the weight of her uniform pressing down on her shoulders in a way it never had before. Once, it had been armor, something that protected her from the world. Now, it felt like a question she didn't know how to answer. Who was she without the mission? Who was Phantom 7 without the shadows? Back to the boring life, huh? Mason's voice called from behind her. She turned to see him leaning against a railing, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He tossed one to her, and she caught it easily. Boring sounds nice, she said with a small smile. Yeah, well, I'll believe that when I see it. They stood in silence for a moment, watching a group of fresh recruits struggle through a morning drill. Their uniforms were crisp, their faces young, too young. Most of them still believed war was about glory. Most still believed heroism was about medals. "Do you ever wish you could tell them?" Mason asked quietly. "Tell them what?" "The truth, that it's not about the battles you win, it's about the ones you survive." Sarah shook her head. "They wouldn't believe me." "No," Mason agreed, "they wouldn't." Later that day, she stood alone in front of a mirror, staring at the reflection that stared back. The woman in the glass looked the same hazel eyes, same steady posture, same uniform pressed to regulation standards. But inside, everything had changed. She wasn't the same person who had walked into Colonel Whitaker's office months ago. She wasn't the same ghost who had tried to disappear into a logistics post. And she certainly wasn't the same Phantom 7 who had once believed she could outrun the consequences of her past. "Ma'am," a voice said from the doorway. Sarah turned. A young lieutenant, barely 22, stood nervously at attention. "Colonel Whitaker asked to see you in his office." She nodded. "Tell him I'll be there." Whitaker's office was exactly as she remembered, Spartan, orderly, filled with the faint scent of polished wood and old leather. The colonel was standing by the window when she entered, hands clasped behind his back. "Lieutenant," he said without turning, "at ease." "Sir." He was silent for a long time, watching the recruits below drill under the morning sun. Finally, he spoke. "I read the reports," he said. "All of them, every mission, every decision, every risk." "Yes, sir. And I need you to know something." He turned, his usually unshakable expression softened by something deeper, respect, perhaps, or gratitude. "I've been in this uniform for 30 years. I've seen men charge machine guns and women drag wounded brothers out of hell, but I've never seen anyone do what you did. Not like that." "Thank you, sir." He studied her carefully. "So what now?" "Now," she shrugged slightly, "now I go back to work." Whitaker shook his head. "I'm not talking about assignments, Lieutenant. I'm talking about you. What happens when the mission ends?" Sarah hesitated. "I'm still figuring that out." "Then maybe that's the mission now," he said, "figuring it out." The weeks that followed were a strange kind of limbo. She taught a few advanced tactics classes to new recruits. She ran logistics briefings. She helped plan humanitarian support missions. On the surface, it was ordinary military life. But beneath it, she felt the tension, the pull between who she was and who she had been. Some nights she woke drenched in sweat, haunted by the faces of those she couldn't save. Other nights, she stood on the observation deck, staring at the stars and wondering if the world would ever really need Phantom 7 again. And yet there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. It was there, in the laughter of recruits sharing stories in the mess hall. It was there, in the thank you letter from a city she'd saved, but would never visit. It was there in the quiet, unremarkable days when no one needed a ghost. Maybe, she thought, that was the point. Maybe the mission had never been about glory or revenge or redemption. Maybe it had always been about finding a way to live with the silence. But peace, as always, was fragile. One evening, Mason found her in the operations center, reviewing training logs. His expression was unreadable calm on the surface, but his eyes carried the weight of something heavier. "You should see this," he said, sliding a classified dossier across the table. Sarah opened it. Satellite images, intercepted communications, a name she hadn't seen in months. Red Hydra, cell activity detected. Her heart sank. Where? Tripoli, intelligence thinks they're reorganizing under new leadership. Smaller, smarter, more dangerous. Harun. In custody, Mason said. But his network isn't dead, and whoever's running it now, they're targeting US and NATO personnel. Sarah stared at the images for a long moment. Then she closed the folder and pushed it back toward him. "This isn't my mission," she said quietly. Mason watched her carefully. isn't it?" She didn't answer. That night, sleep didn't come. She walked through the empty corridors of the base, past rows of photographs and plaques commemorating missions no one remembered. Her boots echoed against the tile floor, each step heavy with the weight of an unspoken truth. She had tried to leave the fight behind. She had tried to bury Phantom 7. But the world, cruel, beautiful, relentless, had a way of pulling ghosts back into the light. She stopped by a window overlooking the darkened runway. A cargo plane rumbled to life in the distance, its engines cutting through the silence. Somewhere out there, another war was beginning. Another enemy was rising. Another mission was waiting. And she knew, deep down, that someone would have to answer that call. "Could be someone else's fight," Mason said the next morning, watching her pack her gear into a weathered duffel. "It could," she agreed. "You don't owe them anything." "No," she said, zipping the bag shut, "but I owe myself something." He sighed. "You're going to keep doing this forever, aren't you?" She gave a faint smile. "Probably." "Then I guess I'm coming with you." She looked up. "You don't have to." "I know," Mason said, "but some ghosts are better when they travel in pairs." The orders were unofficial. The mission was off the books. There would be no medals, no parades, no headlines, but that was how it had always been. Sarah walked down the runway as the sun rose over Okinawa, the light catching the edge of her dog tags. The engines of the transport aircraft roared to life, vibrating through the ground beneath her boots. She paused at the base of the ramp and glanced back at the base, at the recruits, at the life she might have had if things had been different. Then she stepped forward. Because this was who she was. Not a hero, not a legend, not a ghost. Just a soldier who refused to stop fighting. The wind roared as the aircraft lifted into the sky, the world shrinking beneath her. Somewhere beyond the clouds, new threats waited. New battles loomed. New scars would be carved into the history books, scars that no one would ever read about. But for Sarah Keating, that was enough. Because the measure of a soldier was never in the medals they wore or the wars they fought. It was in the choices they made when no one was watching. It was in the lives they saved without thanks. It was in the battles they fought within themselves, and the courage to keep fighting anyway. And sometimes dignity didn't speak. It simply acted.